Okay, so this evening we're looking at free relief rules 15 and 16. These are, of course, the best rules because you're getting out of lies and conditions that you may not otherwise be able to. So, part of 15, we're looking at loose impediments, movable obstructions, ball marker, and balls sort of helping, interfering with play. How we sort of get around those, the difference between helping and interfering, we'll get into that. And then getting into rule 16, we're going to look at abnormal course conditions, that is animal holes, ground under repair, temporary water, and immovable obstructions. Dangerous animal conditions, some interesting stuff there too, and embedded ball, as well as lifting the ball to see if relief conditions apply. So a lot of stuff going on here. We'll crack right on, get into rule 15. So, as I'm sure a lot of you know, and are familiar with, these definitions are really the glue that holds together a lot of these rules. So, if you're looking to get good, I'd certainly recommend diving into these definitions. So, we're going to look at that first. We're then going to look into how we remove loose impediments. Then, ball moves. What happens if we're trying to remove something, the ball accidentally moves? How do we proceed there? What happens? So, diving right in. As definitions go, this is a pretty straightforward one. Three words: unattached natural objects. Now, anything that could be stones, grass, leaves, branches, anything that fits that definition. Uh, and we'll touch on some exceptions, but anything that fits that could be considered a loose impediment. You'll see down at the bottom there that even some pretty unsavory things that you might not think as a loose impediment, but we had a situation last summer out at Todd Creek where I got a call on the radio and a player's ball was next to a dead animal. And in that situation, the dead animal falls under the um, definition of loose impediment. And although you might want to touch it or you might want to use some gloves, you're able to just remove that, and that's your relief option in play there. Loose impediments include worms, insects that can be easily removed, and the mounds and webs that they build as well. So the definition, the word loose, there are certain ways we can talk about this. Anything that is attached or growing, solidly embedded, sticking to the ball, those aren't loose. One example I've heard is if you switch their gravity off, will it sort of separate from the ground and lift up? Is that going to happen in that scenario? And is it loose in that respect? And talking to some of the volunteers I work with, like often people they call it the flick test. Like, can you flick it out of the ground or is it solidly embedded there? So just some useful ways of thinking about that term loose and what like fits this qualifying definition of loose impediments. So some special cases, as we see a lot, we have special cases and exceptions. Sand, loose soil, dew frost, although it might be natural and loose, it's not going to fall under loose impediments. So sand and loose soil, we're not going to be able to remove that if it's not on the putting green. Dew frost or water, you can't be removing that either. So if you think you can sweep all the dew off your putting line, you're going to get in trouble if you do that. So just be careful. Another special case, snow, natural ice. We see a lot here in Colorado, especially this time of year where a lot of the course is thawed out. A lot of course gets a lot of the sun, but just those shady parts still stay snowy and natural, have sort of ice on top of them. Um, those conditions can either be a loose impediment or temporary water. So you can either be removing that from around the ball, or you can just get relief entirely from that. And we'll cover how do we get relief from temporary water a bit later on, but it's just going to be your nearest point of complete relief. Spider webs, we can remove these, although they may be attached, they're easily removable. So these fall into a loose impediment. So if you want to remove a spider web, the reasoning behind this, they're very easy to walk through. So we're just trying to remove that risk of players getting inadvertent penalties here when they're walking through the jungle or I know in Florida, the mangrove, there's a lot of spider webs in there. If you're walking through there, walk through a spider web, you're not going to get a penalty for removing that. Removing loose impediments, they can be removed anywhere on or off the golf course. So of course your ball has to be on the golf course, but if you're just up against the boundary and there's something on the other side there that's in your way, we can remove that in any way. So in any way there, I'll just go back and touch on that. If you wanted to come out here with a leaf blower in the fall and get rid of all those leaves, that's okay. It falls into any way. You might not make many friends. It's not the best etiquette, but that's legal in this case. So two exceptions. This first one, no removing loose impediments where the ball must be replaced. So the thinking behind this is, if you're lifting the ball for some reason and the ball's resting on something, if that loose impediment wouldn't have been able to be removed without moving that golf ball, we're not going to be able to remove that loose impediment. So if your ball's resting on a leaf and you for some reason have to pick up that ball, we can't then move the leaf. Now, another note here is if that leaf blows away and you're not deliberately moving it and natural forces just remove that loose impediment, we don't have to go and replace that leaf. We don't have to go and chase it down and put it back. If it blows away, we just put the ball back and continue on. This applies when players stopped, but does not apply on the putting green. So, as we learned in areas of the course, putting green, very favorable part of the green. There's definitely videos I've seen out there where balls have to come to rest on a leaf, and you're able to mark that, remove the leaf, and put it back down. So, does not apply to the putting green. And no deliberately moving loose impediments to affect the ball in motion. This is going to apply to movable obstructions as well. We'll see in a minute. Anytime we're moving or putting something down to affect that ball in motion, it's big trouble, and we're going to get a penalty for that most times. So if your ball's rolling on the green and it's rolling towards a stick and you move that stick, it's going to be a general penalty. So just keep that in mind when we're dealing with loose impediments. Okay, our first question slide. Any questions from anyone? Chris, Ali, anything in the chat there?
Nothing, George. Actually, we just got one.
Okay. What have we got? Let me see. Can you remove a small stone or rock? So if it's so we're gonna cover that right now, Mike. How we deal with loose impediments close to the ball that may move the ball. So I believe your question is about to be answered here. Just because it might cause danger to the golfer or the damage to the club or ball doesn't change the situation. If we're that worried about the danger, we can always take unplayable ball relief. And likewise, if we just want to remove that rock or something up against the ball, and if it doesn't move the ball and it's unattached, that's absolutely fine. That's just a loose impediment we're moving. But if that ball moves, as you'll see here in a minute, we're going to get that penalty. So I hope that answers your question. With that being said, we'll keep on moving here, trying to keep us on time. Let me see. So the process of removing. So the ball must be replaced. We get a one-stroke penalty if we don't replace that ball. What have I missed here? Maybe we've missed a slide. Ball must be replaced. Okay, so yeah, we can putting green teeing area during a search. If we accidentally move that ball during on the putting green, any accidental movement of the ball, no penalty. Teeing area, we can move that ball freely wherever we want. And during a search, if we accidentally move that ball during a search, no penalty there either. We're just going to replace it. But just going back, we accidentally move our ball while removing a loose impediment in any of these areas, it's going to be a one-stroke penalty, and we're going to replace that ball. So, Mike, if you're worried about a stone in the bunker and you want to move that, you might get a one-stroke penalty. You're risking it there. So this is the risk we take when we're removing loose impediments. We're missing some slides here, but yeah. So this is why you sort of see the players on PJ Tour and on TV be so careful when they're dealing with these loose impediments, especially in conditions like pine straw or sand, where you may be looking to remove something a few inches away from the ball, but you don't know how they're connected. And if you lift that up and the ball moves, automatic one-stroke penalty. So just very important to be careful when we're removing stuff around the ball. But and like I said, if you do, we're just putting that ball back. We don't have to put the loose impediment back, just the ball, and we're going to continue on there. Pretty quick 2 slides. I think we're at another question slide if that has any questions from that. Ball removes, removing loose impediments. If not, I'll just keep going. So, loose impediments, movable obstructions. We're going to talk about what's the difference, definition of instructions, movable obstructions, how we remove those, what happens if our ball is in or on that movable obstruction. Obviously, there's a lot of things that fall under that definition of movable obstruction. Some of them are big enough where a ball can come to rest on them. How do we proceed there? And then what happens if a ball comes to rest there? We know it and we can't find it. How do we proceed and get our ball back into play in those situations? So, any artificial object is an obstruction. That being said, we have our boundary objects. So those are the fences, stakes, any objects that is being used to define the edge of the golf course and the boundary of the golf course. So the committee can define those. That being said, we also have integral objects. Integral objects basically just obstructions that are intended to be a part of the challenge of playing the course. So it may be a retaining wall, might be a rock wall. I'm trying to think of some examples here, but well, the most famous example is the road on 17 at St. Andrews. That road you often see players playing off. That's an integral object, part of the challenge of playing the golf course. So those are the two things to look out for, where if our ball's up against the boundary object or an integral object, we're not going to get relief from those. So a movable obstruction is obviously an obstruction that can be moved with reasonable effort without damaging that obstruction or damaging the course. So easiest example here is a red or yellow penalty stake. Lift it up, put it back down. Super easy to move. You're not damaging the course in any way. I'm trying to think of another example here. We have a bench, maybe a movable obstruction. All of these things can fit this definition and can be moved in such a case. So, like I said, examples, stakes, golf carts, waste containers. We have a picture here on the right, and there are a lot of movable obstructions we have here. The bench, the ball washer, the rubbish bin. And then another definition to know is player's equipment too. And the definition for equipment is anything that the player is holding or using. So we have the club, shoes. If our hat blows off and runs down the fairway, that's going to be an equipment there, and as well as an immovable obstruction. So this is where you'll see these definitions really coming into play. When we have objects on the course, we know what they are, because you'll see here in a minute, different rules apply. So what happens if movable parts of immovable obstructions? So what this means is what happens if we have a fence and there's a gate in the fence and we can move that gate freely. It's designed to move. What happens in this case? In this case, it's simply treated as a movable obstruction. And if that's the only interference you have is that gate, we're not going to get relief from the immovable part of that fence if we can simply move that gate out of the way. So there are times where, although it may look as all as one part, if a single part of that obstruction is movable, it's going to be treated as such. Now, with that being said, that's only if it's meant to be moved. So you see here an example on the right picture. We have players in a bulkhead, it looks like. This piece of wood obviously isn't meant to be moved. So therefore it's not a movable obstruction. Can't be bending and breaking, stuff like that when it's not meant to be moved. Um, so how do we take relief in this situation? Movable obstructions relief, it can be moved without penalty. And again, we're dealing with anywhere on or off the golf course. And the exception is tee markers. Now, brackets here, when the ball's in the teeing area. I got the question last week at a seminar that what happens if you hit it off the tee and it hits a tree and it comes back right against the tee marker? Well, in that case, we can move that tee marker because the ball's in the general area outside of the teeing area. If you're trying to start a hole from the teeing area and you really like to play from the left side and it opens up the hole and you get that angle, if you're standing on that tee marker, we can't move it. In that case, we're going to get a penalty for moving that tee marker. And again, we're looking at to deliberately affect a ball in motion. Now, in some variations of the slide deck we use, this is a video on the right. This is a video from Southern Hills in Oklahoma at the Senior Open in 2009, I believe. And a player's played from a bunker off screen here on the left. And that's a false front you see there. And it's got to the top of the hill and started to roll towards the water. And the caddy sees it's going to hit this rake. So instinctively, he's gone and picked up that rake and the ball's gone into the penalty area. Now, he's picked up that movable obstruction to affect the ball in motion. And as a result, he's going to get the general penalty. Not only that, where's the ball? Ball's in the penalty area. So he's got the two-stroke penalty for moving the movable obstruction to affect the ball in motion. And he's now having to take penalty relief on top of that. So although it's instinctive to pick it up, always best to leave rakes and movable obstructions in place if they're going to affect the ball in motion. Now, what happens if our ball's up against that movable obstruction and we're trying to get relief, and what do? Great example here on the right. It's the one I see the most often and probably the easiest one that you will come across in your time. Ball's up against a rake. Like I said, movable obstruction, what do? Simply no penalty, and we're going to replace that ball on its original spot. So imagine this is a slope here, you lift the rake, the ball rolls, you get no penalty for that. This is not loose impediments. So if your ball moves or removing a movable obstruction, we're not going to get a penalty for that. We're just going to put the ball back on the original spot, continue on. If we don't know the original spot, we're just going to estimate and replace on that spot. So we're not dropping, simply placing it back down. And in the case of any of these relief options, whenever we're taking, whether it's free relief or penalty relief, we can either use the original ball or replace that ball. So if you're up against a abnormal course condition, you always have the option to replace that ball. Same if you have movable obstructions too. Okay. Relief for a ball in or on movable obstructions. So, example here on the right, the ball has landed on a towel. How do we proceed? Simply going to be lifting that ball, getting rid of the obstruction, and then this is in the general area, we're going to be dropping the original or another ball in that relief area. So, again, another example I had last summer was sitting in my cart by the green and hear a shout of four, and all of a sudden there's a golf ball in my cart. How do we proceed? It's on a movable obstruction. We're just gonna pick up the ball, move the golf cart, and then put the ball back down directly under where that ball was. And like I said, one club length, same area of the course, and not nearest to the hole. Now, what happens if we're on a putting green? Example here on the right, like we just saw, play group in front's left their towel behind, ball from the group behind's rolled up on that. Same thing, except we're going to be placing that original ball or another ball right under that where that spot was. Now, what happens if we don't find that ball? Again, there's a great video out there. I'll let you look it up on your own. It's at Waste Management. And a ball is hit from the fairway, it's up by the green, it's wide, it bounces, goes straight into a rubbish bin. And it's one of those plastic cardboard rubbish bins. So fits the definition of movable, right at the bottom there. How do we proceed? Now, we see this term here, knowledge or virtual certainty. We see it a lot in the rules. It's very important we understand how this works and that we reach that certainty. So we're basically saying, do we know that's where the ball is? And the rules tell us that that level is a 95% certainty. So 19 times out of 20, we know the ball is where it is. If we can't reach that, and maybe it's 50-50, I don't know, we can't proceed under this. We have to reach that 95% certainty, have that knowledge or virtual certainty that that's where the ball is. In which case, relief is allowed. And we're going to estimate the point under where that ball last crossed the outer edge of that movable obstruction, or in this case, rubbish bin. And we're going to continue on. So I'll use this example on the right. Players hit it into this ice box. It's a movable obstruction. We're just going to estimate where that ball went from the general area into the ice box. And that's our reference point. And that's how we're going to make our relief area. And like I said, if we can't reach that knowledge or virtual certainty, we can't take relief in this case. And we're going to have to take stroke and distance for a ball not found. So we basically just lost that ball. And we're going to have to go back to where we played from and continue out the hole in that case. So you'll see here why that knowledge and virtual certainty is such an important qualifier for a lot of these rules. And we'll see it more often as we keep going here. Okay, we covered a lot with that one. Any questions when it comes to movable obstructions?
George, there is a new one in the chat.
Okay, let me see. Ball is against a rake in a bunker, replaced on the original spot. It won't stay there. What do you do? Great. So this is the case whether it's in a bunker, out of the bunker, wherever you are. If you can't replace that ball on the original spot, we're just going to search around and try and find the nearest point, no closest to the hole, where that ball will stay. Now, it has to stay in the bunker in this case. We can't take it outside the bunker, but we're just going to be probing around, maybe taking it back a little bit. And as soon as it stays where it is, that ball is in play. Speaking of a steep bank on a bunker, yeah. So if it's on the top there, on the face, and it's just outside the bunker, if it won't stay there, we're going to be moving. Maybe it may be side to side. As long as it's not closest to the hole, it's just going to be the nearest point where that ball will stay. Because yeah, you do see that sometimes, and it's the same. We'll see it in embedded ball here in a minute too. It's the same case. Okay. If there's nothing else, I'll keep going. We have one more from Rob. It looks like ball lands behind a trash can. The can is in the way of the shot. The club won't actually hit the can. Well, in this case, is the can movable or immovable? Because if we can pick up that trash can and move it to the side and it's movable, it's absolutely fine. We can move movable obstructions whether they're in a way or not. So in that case, yep, you're free to pick that up, move it to the side, and I always think it's polite to put it back, but no obligation. Okay. Let me keep moving here. We're going to be moving on to, let me see, our last part of 15, ball helping on the putting green, helping play. How do we proceed here? So we're also going to talk about interfering, that difference between helping and interfering, as well as what happens if that's their ball marker. So sometimes we hear it on tour, backstopping. For those who don't know, it's where ball is by the flag on the green, player doesn't mark it because someone's hitting up, and that ball may serve as a little backstop there to help any ball running past to slow down and stop closer to the hole. This should be considered helping play. This applies to balls, only balls on a putting green, just because it's hard to imagine where a ball off the putting green can really be helpful. So this is just applying to balls on the putting green. If it's your ball, you may mark and lift it. If it's any other player's ball, you can require that that ball be lifted. So if Chris and I are playing here and Ali's ball is in the way, either Chris or I can say, "Hey, that's helping whoever. Can we have that lifted?" Now, this is pretty serious. If two or more players agree to leave a helping ball in place, and a stroke is made, both of those players get the general penalty. Um, and the stroke is made here is the key point here. So if I go back and someone's someone's required me to lift my ball, and I say I don't think it's helping, I'm just gonna leave it. Someone then makes a stroke and I haven't picked up my ball, I'm gonna get a general penalty. So once that request is made, you have to oblige, otherwise you're gonna get a penalty once they make that stroke. With that being said, if they're required to lift it, they can play first in stroke play. In match play, players, I don't know why you would, but there's no penalty for this. You can agree to leave your ball in play. As we talked about in forms of the play, the difference between stroke play and match play is in match play, it's just you and your opponent. So if you want to make an agreement like that, absolutely fine. Stroke play, obviously, there's people elsewhere in the field who might feel differently, and we have to protect their rights. Any questions there? If not, we'll keep moving. We're going to talk about interfering next. We have quite a bit to cover tonight, so I'm trying to keep things moving. So the meaning of interference. This could be stance, swing, in the vicinity where your stroke may hit the ball at rest, or even just enough to distract. And now this could be in the general area, this could be anywhere where a playing partner's ball or anyone's ball is close enough where it interferes with any of those things. Now, the player next to play can require that ball to be marked and lifted. So notice it's just the player, so it's not all players. And in stroke play, like before, that interfering ball can be played first. Now, the player of the interfering ball cannot lift that if not requested to. So if I'm walking ahead of Chris and Ali and my ball's right next to Chris's, and I go, "Oh, well, it must be in his way. I'm going to pick it up." If I've lifted that ball without getting that request first, I'm going to get a penalty for lifting my ball without reason. So always wait until you get that request. And yeah. And of course, these are all except on the putting green. We can lift our ball on the putting green wherever we want. We know that. And like I said, if lifting when asked, you're going to get a one-stroke penalty. Now, this is one of the 4 times where a ball interfering with play, we cannot clean that ball. So again, you often see the two-finger thing where we pick up a ball just as a two-finger, just to make it super obvious we're not accidentally cleaning that ball. Sometimes we see a player pick up a ball like that and then chuck it to a caddy who's holding a towel. That ball better have been spotless when he threw it, because if there's anything coming off that ball, he's going to get a penalty there for cleaning that. So important we don't clean it. Now, before we go on to ball markers here, the way I always think about this, it used to be called assisting. So helping, assisting, interfering. So we have assisting with an A, interfering with an I. Assisting, all players can make that request. Interfering, only I can make that request. So any player can request a helping ball be lifted. Only I can make a request for an interfering ball be lifted. So that's how I remember those differences. Okay, we're now going to move on to ball markers. Ignore this decision here. That's from the old rules. The short ball marker, we can move it out of the way. You just have to be measuring it. So a lot of people use club heads, but you can also use a club length. Just as long as we're getting that ball back on its exact spot. If it belongs to another player, we can require them to move it. So, yeah, if Chris's ball marker's in the way, I can say, "Hey, Chris, I'm going to need that moved," and he's required to move that. And if he doesn't, then again, it's going to be a penalty there for failing to oblige. So, uh, just some things, especially on the green, especially when we're playing with a big group with 3 or 4 people, and there's a lot of balls around. These rules are very helpful to know what we can and can't do, and how we're proceeding on the greens. Okay, I covered that pretty quickly. Any questions there with ball interfering or ball marker helping or interfering?
George, there's one new one in the chat.
Thank you, Chris. Can you ask a out of your view? Yeah. So, Brandon, this is gonna fall into the distraction bucket. So, if you're hitting a stroke and you can just see their ball out of the corner of their eye, you can have them mark that and lift that, just because it's a distraction there. So, yep, you can do that. And then let me see. Carry, when you are putting and you hit your ball and it hits a ball that is not marked, who gets the penalty? So in stroke play, whoever's hit that ball is going to get the general penalty, because they should have requested that ball be lifted. In a match play, no penalty to anyone. And if it's your ball that's been hit, that's no penalty to you. We're just going to put it back to where it was. Mike, when lifting an interfering ball and the ball has some mud on it or on it that may affect the next stroke, do you have to replace the ball in the same orientation? Gosh, that's a good question, Mike. I would say no. I would say as long as that ball is getting back to its exact position on the golf course, you can orientate it in any way. So in that case, it's your lucky day. Okay, some good questions there. I appreciate them. We're going to keep on rolling. Let's see. Okay, so that was 15. We're going to head into rule 16 now. And abnormal course conditions. When relief is allowed, how we take relief. Well, again, what happens if we don't find our ball in one of these conditions? Abnormal course conditions and no play zones. What do we do then? So, first of all, we're missing a definition slide. Always good to start with a definition. Abnormal course conditions, what are they? I mentioned before, we have 4. We have animal holes, immovable obstructions, ground under repair, and temporary water. So those 4 are all treated the same way. So in any of these examples we see, it doesn't matter if it's a puddle or a sprinkler head or a cart path, anything that fits one of those 4 is all going to be treated the same way under these next couple of rules. Okay, how do we get relief? So great example here on the right, temporary water. When are we allowed to take relief in this case? So whenever a ball touches, it's in or on that condition. That condition affects our intended stance, intended swing, and on the putting green, that's on our line of play. So line of play doesn't matter when it comes to general area, but if we have a puddle or a sprinkler head on our line of play there, we're going to get relief in those cases. So good note there. And distraction alone here is not interference. So unlike we saw with ball interfering, if we're right by this puddle and we have glare coming off and it's a big distraction, unless we hit one of these 4 bullet points up above, we're not going to get relief for that distraction alone. Relief is allowed anywhere except when our ball is in the penalty area, that abnormal course condition is not on the course, and that stroke is clearly unreasonable. So, of course, if our ball's in the penalty area and it's plugged or we have wet ground or these conditions exist, we're not going to get relief. And unfortunately, if we can't play it, it's going to be penalty relief to get us out of that situation. Unlike we saw with loose impediments and movable obstructions, if this condition is off the golf course, we're not going to get relief. So again, if we're right on that boundary edge and we're standing in a puddle that's just off the course, that is not going to get us relief, unfortunately. And then lastly, we see this exception with a lot of these relief conditions. If the stroke's unreasonable, um, we're not going to get relief. The example I give, if your ball's in a bush, you can't make a stroke at it, it's way in there, and you go in and somehow find your ball and you think you'd be standing on an animal hole, there's no way you'd be able to play that shot, and therefore it's unreasonable for us to be getting relief in those cases. So how do we take relief? Again, these diagrams are really good. They're in the rule book, but we have an example of ground under repair. What are we doing here? So we're just taking our nearest point of complete relief, one club length in the general area, not nearer the hole, and must take complete relief here. I highlight that because we're talking nearest point of complete relief. So if that condition still exists in some form or another, if we're still standing on that ground under repair, we haven't taken full relief, and therefore that relief area is wrong, and we're going to be getting a penalty for playing from a wrong place. So, and you see it on tour sometimes too, especially with those walkways. I think Rory McIlroy got a penalty for it once because he was still standing on that white line. So, especially with any of these conditions, if we're still interfering, we haven't taken relief, and we're going to have to continue that relief process. So, bunker relief, same things. All of these conditions apply. How do we take relief in the bunker? So again, example on the right, we have temporary water in a bunker. It's going to be that nearest point of complete relief. Again, we can't be changing areas of the course here. It has to stay in the bunker. And we're just going to be taking one club length in the bunker, no nearer to the hole. And that is complete relief, if possible. So again, that I'm highlighting this in the bunker because it has to land in that relief area and stay in the relief area. So unfortunately, there's a good chance that ball's going to plug, but there's no opportunity to like drop it on a slope and have it roll down if that slope's outside the relief area. So when we're doing this, it has to land and stay in that relief area. Now, this last bullet point is referencing situation if the slide is hit like this. Yes. So I'll use this picture on the right. We're talking about maximum relief. This picture on the right, imagine this whole bunker is underwater. And there's nowhere in this bunker where we're going to be able to take relief and we're not still going to have that interference. So what do we do? Unfortunately, we're having to stay in that bunker, but we're just going to find the area no closer to the hole that gives us the least interference from that condition. So that might be the ball's out of the water, but we're standing in it, or we find the shallower parts of the water. Now 9 times out of 10, that bunker is going to be ground under repair. So hopefully it doesn't happen too much often. But again, if it does, the rules gives us a solution and a way to get out of it. Now with that, we are able to take really a penalty relief stroke to get out of the bunker. So again, we see our diagram on the right, our ball's in this bunker, it's in a puddle. If we don't like anywhere we're dropping in the bunker and we really want to get out, we do have an option to do that. So we can go back online through the spot of the original ball, and we're dropping on that line for one penalty stroke. This could be in any part of the golf course, and that's how we're going to get back in play. So what happens if we're on a putting green? Like I mentioned, this is line of play, and also simply what are we doing with puddles like this? So we have an abnormal course condition, our ball lies in it. We're going to be placing this time the original ball or another ball on that nearest point of complete relief. So looks like our player's left-handed here. He's taken the nearest point where none of that condition interferes anymore. And whenever we're taking relief on the putting green, we're going to be placing. Now, this last point in the general area, his nearest point of complete relief might be on the fringe or the fairway. That's going to be where he's placing that ball. The original spot where the ball was on the green, so whenever we're taking relief, it's still going to be a drop. Sorry, excuse me, a place. So if that nearest point of complete relief turns out to be on the fringe, we're just going to be placing it there and continuing on. Doesn't have to be on the putting green. And again, if no complete relief is available, use maximum available relief. I've seen a diagram where it's basically a donut or a moat of water around the hole. There's no clear way through where that water isn't going to be affecting your line of play. So we're just going to choose perhaps the point where it's the shallowest water or the narrowest part of the water. But there might be an occasion where there's nowhere on that green where there's going to be no interference. So we're going to be using maximum available relief at that point. And again, must be on the putting green or in the general area. So we're not restricted to putting green. We get really stuck, we can go to the fringe. Any questions there? Let me have a look.
There is one new one in the chat.
Brandon, are fairway divots considered ground under repair? No. So it's a good question. If we look at the definition, divots aren't included in that. A question to you whenever I get asked, like, should people get free relief from fairway divots? Define a fairway divot. They vary so much. Like, is it a little scrape from the fairway, a little fairway divot? So hard to say. So no, unfortunately, don't get any relief from fairway divots. That's a part of the game. We're just going to play the ball as the lies and continue on. Okay, getting close to the end here. Let me see. We're going to keep on going. So what happens if we can't find our ball? So very similar to what we talked about earlier with movable obstructions or immovable obstructions. We need to have that knowledge of virtual certainty. And we're going to estimate where that ball last crossed the outer edge. So same idea. If we have a large area of temporary water, and it's pretty much a pond, and we see our ball splash in there and we know it's in there, we're just going to estimate where that ball last crossed from the course into the abnormal course condition and take relief. So as I said, nearest point of complete relief from that reference point. And this line, use applicable relief area, basically saying if you're in the general area, you're going to be dropping. If you're on the green, it's going to be a place. And again, unfortunately, if we don't have knowledge or virtual certainty, it's practically a lost ball. We're going to be taking stroke and distance, going back to where we're playing for and continuing on from there. We have to have that knowledge or virtual certainty to proceed. If we have a blind hole and we think it's in a puddle or we think it's lost in this condition, we have to be 95% sure. Can't stress that enough. Okay. Sometimes we have no play zones. No play zones can be abnormal course conditions and they can be penalty areas. Either way, the ball must not be played from that area. In this case, free relief is required. So this could be a flower bed we don't want to damage. I've even heard of cemeteries on golf courses. And courses can implement a do not enter policy, but in the rules of golf, it's simply we can't play our ball from there. If we do, we're going to get a penalty for a wrong place, and that's a two-stroke penalty. So the course will make it very obvious when it's a no-play zone, but it's important we understand what they are, and it's important we're not playing from there. That was a quick one. Don't see any questions in the chat. I'll keep going here. Now, dangerous animal conditions. What does this mean? What do we do? How do we take relief? When is it allowed? that procedure. So the example here, and we'll touch on some examples in a minute. We have an alligator. Obviously, we don't have many alligators in Colorado, but we might have elk, we might have bears, other things that can cause a serious physical injury to a player if we continue to play that ball. I'll highlight here physical. If you're deathly afraid of butterflies and you're terrified of them, it's not going to qualify for dangerous animal condition. It has to be a physical threat, not just a psychological one. Examples are snakes, bees, ants, anything that you deem may cause you harm. I often get the question, how do you know if a snake is poisonous or venomous? How do you know if an ant is a dangerous ant? You're using your best judgment. If you know they're in the area, please take relief. Yeah. And of course, like I said, there's no need to be, I'm going to talk about how we get relief here in a minute, but like there's no need to be getting that original ball. But I'll mention that when we talk about how we take relief. Relief is allowed anywhere on the golf course, including penalty areas, but I'll touch on that. And again, we're seeing the same exception when that stroke is clearly unreasonable. Okay, so how do we take relief? It's going to be our nearest point, no closer to the hole, simply where that dangerous animal condition doesn't exist. If we have a bear on the course or a snake or it may be a bear, I'd say probably is going to be at least 50 yards away. No closer to the hole. And like I said, we don't have to go and get that original ball. We can just put a new one down. We're going to be dropping it. We're going to continue on. Now, a snake, it may be 10 meters. Ants, maybe 5 feet. You see the reasonable sort of distance here when it comes to dangerous animals. That's going to be your nearest point. I'm going to use the same relief procedure we just saw. So nearest point of relief going to be a drop in the general area of bunker and a place on the putting green. Now, it's rare we're going to get free relief in the penalty area. It's very unusual we get this, but in this case we do. How do we proceed? Our ball is right next to this alligator. We are allowed to take relief. Has to be the nearest point of complete relief. The catch has to be in the penalty area. This isn't going to allow us to get out of the penalty area. If we're going to take free relief, we have to find somewhere in that penalty area, no closer to the hole, to drop that ball. With that being said, you're not trapped. We always have the penalty relief options. So if you want to just take stroke and distance or back on the line or lateral if it's red, we can just do that. We don't have to go and find that original ball and try and take free relief somehow. And again, that's one penalty stroke in this case. We can use any of those penalty relief options. I think I saw some questions in the chats. Amy, if no play zone is in a penalty area, no free relief. That is correct. So, if we have a red penalty area and it's no play zone, it's mandatory penalty relief in that case. So we have to take, we have no option to play it as it lies. We have to take a one-stroke penalty to get out of that penalty area. And a question from Kari: what if a penalty area is marked as a rattlesnake area, but none can be seen nearby? Good question. Your course, I would typically say, would mark that as a no play zone if that threat's there. We have to be certain of the animal's existence. So we have to be confident that threat is there. If you don't see anything, we have to know where the animal is to be able to get relief from it, if that makes sense. So we can't just presume a bear's over there somewhere, because how do you take relief if you don't know where the animal is? You have to know so you can take your nearest point of complete relief. But Kari, that sounds like a lot of course specific questions often falls back to the committee, how the committee and the course wants to set that up. And in this case, I'd say I'd be making that G or no play zone, so none of my players are going in there. But I'll just check with them. Let me see. I think we have one more topic here before we wrap up. Embedded balls. What does it mean to be embedded? When we get free relief, it's going to be in the entire general area on the putting green. And how are we going to take relief? So relief is allowed throughout the general area. We often get the common misconception that you're only allowed embedded ball relief in the fairway. That's just a local rule that can be added. With no local rule in play, if your ball fits the definition of embedded, you can take relief anywhere in the general area. And it's important that we know that ball's in its own pitch mark rather than another pitch mark. If we have reasonable belief, that's enough. We don't have to hit the known or virtual certainty. In this case, it's just reasonable belief that that ball's in that pitch mark. So what happens how do we know if a ball's embedded? Great picture on the right. Both of these balls are embedded. It has to be in its own pitch mark as a result of the previous stroke, and the part of the ball has to be below the surface of the ground. And that's what this diagram on the right is highlighting. So both of these balls are below that soil line. An important note is, I'll go back. It doesn't have to breach the soil. So just because it hasn't touched soil doesn't mean it's not embedded. It's simply below the level of the ground is when we're going to get relief for embedded ball. The ball is not embedded if it's been stepped on or run over by a cart. Doesn't fit the definition. It's going to be moved by an outside influence, and we're going to be taking relief from either for our nearest similar lie. So we're just going to lift up that ball, find the nearest point within a club length that's similar to that lie, and continue on. So that's not embedded ball, different relief procedure. That's just going to be moved by an outside influence. Same, it's not embedded if it's just been driven straight into the ground. If you're on a steep upslope and tried to hit a low shot and it's gone straight into the ground, fortunately, that's not embedded. Most likely taking unplayable ball relief in that situation, or as a result of dropping it. So if we're in a very wet area and you drop it and it splats, unfortunately, not embedded. So like I said, if you can't tell if it's in its own pitch mark or another, we're going to use all the information we have available, and we're just going to see if it's reasonable to conclude that. So if you've seen it rolling along the fairway and you find it in a pitch mark, most likely not yours. That's sort of the information we're looking at here. So how do we take relief? It is the spot in the general area, right behind that ball, and we're going to get one club length no closer to the hole. You get one club length area, not nearer to the hole, and in the general area. Some of the common questions I get asked, can I repair that hole? Yes, you can, as long as it's not improving any of your conditions. You're just caring for the course, so you can repair that hole. And what happens if I'm still standing on that hole? So if I'm over here on the right of the relief area and your stance is still on that hole, you've taken relief properly and your ball's in the correct area, so you've done it right, and you're just going to continue on. Some exceptions. No relief if your ball is embedded in sand. Now, on the right here, we have, I think it's Pinehurst, course known for its sandy areas. If that isn't cut to fairway height, we're not going to get relief. Now, the reason this is here is a good clarification. I'm not sure if any of you can guess. This exception is there for sand-filled divots. So if your ball is plugged in a sand-filled divot, we're going to get relief for embedded ball in that case because it's fairway height. But if it's in a sandy area like this, no relief, unfortunately. And again, we see the same exception. If it's clearly unreasonable, we can make a stroke. Great picture here on the right, ball embedded at the base of a tree. There's no way we'd be able to reasonably take a stroke at that, so we can't take free relief to get out of that situation. And what happens if we're on a putting green? This is an easy one. We're simply going to mark lift your ball, repair the ball mark, and replace it on that original spot. So as all falls under the characteristics of being on a putting green. It's just going to be placing on that original spot. Okay, our last question slide. Chris, anything left in the chat there?
Yep, we got one last question.
Um, Brandon, can you clean your ball when it's been moved from being embedded? Yes. Whenever we have ball in hand and we're taking relief, we can clean our ball. And same as we can substitute it too. We can put a new ball in play. Um, there are 4 times where we can't clean our ball. I should know them off the top of my head, but it's going to be to see if your ball's cut or cracked, to lift to identify it, interfering with play, and to checking to see if we get free relief. Amy asks, can you clarify embedded in sand, not cut to fairway height? So yes, so the easiest thing to do is to go back to this slide here, Amy. If your ball's embedded in this sandy area and the ball hasn't been, and obviously not cut to fairway height, we can't get embedded ball relief in that case. But if we're in an area that has been cut to fairway height and we're in an area of sand, the example is a sand-filled divot, that is going to be able to get embedded ball relief. I'm going to keep powering on. I think there was one last part of 16. Yes, very quick though. We're going to be lifting to see if a rule applies. We must follow procedure. This is basically just talking about I'm trying to lift the ball to see if I get free relief. And you can't tell without lifting the ball. The most common way we're using this is for embedded ball. So we think a ball might be embedded. We have to lift it. So we're just going to mark it. We don't have to announce it. Like I said, must marked. And this is one of those 4 occasions I just mentioned we can't clean this time. And so if you do that and you're not entitled to relief, so you've gone and marked it and you've checked it, we're just going to be replacing that original ball back down. So we're not taking relief, so we can't change balls, we can't clean it. And we're going to get a 1-stroke penalty if we haven't marked it or we've cleaned it, or both. So if you haven't marked it and you've cleaned it, it's all going to fall into that one penalty stroke, singular penalty stroke. With that being said, if you've failed to mark it and you've cleaned it, not knowing if you're going to get relief or not, and you end up getting relief, you've lucked out because you've taken free relief. Not marking it and cleaning it, you're okay to do that now. So we're just going to proceed with that relief procedure and no penalty there. And that was our last slide. I had to check, but I did see some questions come into the chat, so I'll try and do those quickly before we run out of time. I've got a question from Mike. Can you repair a ball mark that is off the green that is in your line of play of the next stroke? Say you're putting from off the green through a ball mark. Good question. I don't believe you can. If your ball's off the green and that pitch mark's off the green, we can't be repairing that. That pitch mark has to be on the green. And another one from Mike. Once you take free relief inside the penalty area from a dangerous animal and then want to get out of the penalty area. So good question, Mike. So basically he's asking, you've taken free relief from a dangerous animal and your relief area is pretty rubbish and you don't like where you've dropped it and you want to get back out. How do you do it? So your reference point's still going to be that same place where you last hit your shot into the penalty area. So you're just going to use that reference point to take penalty relief from there. So if you want to get out, you can take lateral relief or back on line or stroking distance. Robin, in general, do you always get a penalty for lifting your ball if you do not mark it first? Well, Robin, it depends what we're doing there. If we're lifting it to take relief from something, there's no penalty. If we're on a cart path and we have our relief area, it's recommended because it helps get the most accurate relief area, but you're not going to get a penalty for not marking it. Marking it is simply we're going to replace it on that exact spot. And so if we're taking relief and we're going to a relief area and we're not going back to that exact spot, we don't need to mark it. But like I said, it's useful to finding a good relief area. But if we're checking to see if we have free relief, we have to be marking that. Super. Well, that concludes our seminar today. Thank you everyone much. Thank you everyone very much for taking the time. I appreciate it's in the evening and you all hopping on. We have another seminar next week. It is Rule 9, ball moved at rest. Ball at rest moved, excuse me. And look forward to seeing you there. But otherwise, I'll hang around for a few minutes if there's any last minute questions. But otherwise, have a good night.
Actually, George, it's Amy.
Hi, Amy.
That last question that Mike had, it raised a question for me because if you take the free relief